This is Michael Woodward, and this is Season 3, Episode 227 of the Jumblethink Podcast.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Jumblethink, where we interview amazing entrepreneurs about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. Our guest on today's episode is Javier Mercedes. More about Javier in a moment. Whether you are a new listener or a longtime fan of Jumblethink, you may have missed one of our episodes with incredible guests or topics to help you turn those dreams and ideas into reality. Well, it's a great time to catch up on what you've missed. You can find Jumblethink everywhere you listen to podcasts. To make it even easier, head on over to Apple Podcasts or iTunes or Spotify to check out those past episodes. For Apple Podcasts or iTunes, simply go to jumblethink.com/iTunes. That's jumblethink.com/iTunes. And for Spotify, head on over to jumblethink.com/Spotify. That's jumblethink.com/Spotify. Now let's jump into today's episode. Hey there, welcome to Jumblethink. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have a great episode lined up for you today. Before we get rolling, we want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, OpportunityInChina.com. They can help you learn abroad and get you into incredible colleges in Asia. Or if you are a teacher, they can help position you in opportunities to teach in Asia. We're going to be talking a little bit more about them later in the episode. You can check them out at OpportunityInChina.com. Our guest on today's episode is Javier Mercedes. Super excited to have him on. Who is Javier? Well, he was a full-time audio engineer in Atlanta, Georgia. He left to become the senior video editor at the Chive in Austin, Texas. Since then, he's made a jump to create his own business as an online media creation expert full-time. His podcast, which is killer, is called Passion and Progress. And he has a great podcast where all of those interviews can be seen in video format, not just audio. He also has great tips on that YouTube page, including my favorite, which is an Instagram hack. You should go check that out. Let's jump into the conversation we had with Javier Mercedes. Our guest today is Javier Mercedes. Javier, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, how is it going? I am so glad to be talking to you through the interwebs.
The interwebs. It's always amazing how technology is changing how we communicate and how we're able to connect with people who are states away or countries away.
Multiple time zones. What a time to be alive. I love this.
Yeah. Now, you're in Austin, right?
Austin, Texas. Yep.
Sweet. I was just down there last fall and digging the barbecue and catching up and meeting new people. It was pretty awesome.
Awesome, man. Sounds
now, good. I always like to think about, like, how did I first find the person I'm talking to, or how did I connect? And for you, the way I found you was a friend of mine, Cody Warner, was on your show. You have a podcast and a YouTube channel that does really cool stuff. Started digging around some of your posts, found a post on how to hack Instagram as a podcaster and connect it to Spotify. It was super, super cool. And then I was on doing some research again this morning. I was like, you had my friend Phoebe Morochek on your show too. So it's just kind of crazy.
That's awesome. That it's really cool how small the world is and how big it is at the same time, especially within the content creation side. It's so it baffles me all the time.
Completely. And for you, let's talk about the kind of content you're creating, because cool. Today on the show, we're going to be talking a lot about content creation, finding your voice, finding your audience, and being able to share your story. So let's start with your story. How did you become a content creator, and how did you gravitate to the world of podcasting and vlogging and video production?
Oh, man. All right. So please feel free to cut me off, because I'm trying to get my background story as short and curt as possible. So in order to add more value to the listeners, if I'm doing too much backstory, definitely let me know. So to begin with, I got a degree in audio engineering, and while I was getting my degree, I went out and got a whole bunch of internships, both in live sound and recording. After I graduated, I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and I was lucky enough to score a full-time job at a professional recording studio there. And
Wow.
This did everything from my responsibilities during the day ranged anywhere from recording ADR, which is, I believe, audio dialogue replacement, but that acronym may be wrong. But for the most part, it's recording actors and actresses for their on-camera audio after the fact. So if there was like an ambulance in the background or something like that, they would go into a studio and record it again and then lay that audio in on the movie. Which was really nice because Atlanta has a whole bunch of tax incentives. So a whole bunch of really famous people would be coming through the studio. So early on, right after I graduated, within like 2 years or so, I was already working with people like Morgan Freeman, Jason Bateman. Like, it's weird because I can watch material now on TV and I'll forget that I worked with somebody, but then I'll be like, oh yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal. I got to spend a day with him, like recording him for some stuff, you know? But in the capacity of what I was doing, I was literally just like setting up a mic, hitting record and making sure all the levels were okay and sending that off to post. So fast forwarding on, I did that for about 5 years, got a whole bunch of experience, as you can imagine, moved to Austin, Texas, and got a job as a video editor at the Chive. And that also encapsulated recording their podcast at the same time because they needed somebody to do audio on a podcast that they were just starting. Just so happened that I came from an audio engineering degree. So they're like, hey, Javier, you do this.
Yeah.
So that my segue into podcasting was actually recording the Chive Podcast. We got up to around 100 episodes of that. And the interesting thing with that podcast was all of them were recorded in person. So we would fly out to any and every place and meet with some really special individuals. Like I got to be courtside in like the man cave of Mark Cuban.
Wow.
Like out in the arena, backstage with John Cena, a whole bunch of different other actors and actresses that were coming through on the Chive Podcast. But with that also comes all the experience of editing, back-end material, and just understanding how a podcast works. So I got that kind of background there. And then moving on from there, I started to move up in the Chive as a video editor. And as I moved up, I became senior video editor, and there was a team of other editors underneath me. And with the skill sets that I had garnered over time, I found myself teaching a lot and wanting to get other editors up to speed and get our studios as efficient as possible in the post realm, just so we could churn out content, because the Chive is a big, massive player in the online content arena.
Yeah.
And we were pumping out like 1 to 2 pieces of content a day, and you can imagine,
Which is crazy.
with a
That's
team-
a lot
yeah,
of content creation.
Yeah, and that can be anything from one video that then gets sparsed out into a photo gallery, and there's Instagram, and then there's Facebook, and there's all these different other edits that come along with that. But because I received a plethora, like every single kind of video and like audio kind of problem or challenge that could get thrown at me. I mean, because obviously you're working with like, here's something that we shot in like desert like stuff.
Yeah,
Here's something where we're on a mountain and all this other. So you get to all these experiences. We're working with different codecs and all this other stuff, and encapsulating that. I found that I was teaching all of these other editors that were very awesome in their own regard, but I would be able to teach them some more stuff to take them even further in their career. And I'm totally tooting my own horn here, but every editor that would come through, if they left to another job or even during that time, they'd be like, man, Javier, thank you so much for the stuff that you taught me and all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I was like, man, I really like teaching this kind of material, and I like the whole behind the scenes aspect of content creation. So why not teach it to everybody?
Yeah.
So that's where my YouTube channel came in. I started creating content, and a lot of the material in the beginning was very much tutorials and other things of problems or challenges that I would see as an editor. And then I would be like, look, here's how this thing happens. And say it's this audio type of challenge or whatever. And theoretically, you could do X, Y, and Z. But in the real world, when you have to turn around this content and get it out the door, just do this. Because I was just like, I'm speaking from personal experience, which I think is important when you look for somebody to give you any kind of education on anything. So anything that I teach or I look towards to benefit others with the content that I'm making, I try my hardest not to just talk fluff or make assumptions. Most of the time it's because it's some problem that I've encountered, and these are the steps AYZ. I'm skipping the rest of the alphabet to overcome those problems. And to get to the podcasting side of things, I recently left the Chive to pursue content creation full time, and while I'm doing that, I'm also freelance editing. And freelance videography as well.
Okay.
So it's like it's in tandem. But when I left, what I told myself is, instead of being a guy that's just in a room making tutorials all day, I need some sort of mechanism or system in place to get me out of the house and establish networking and all that other stuff. Because I myself, I'm not like that outgoing to be like, let's go to all these parties and like shake hands and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So case in point, my podcast. And what I do is I actually conduct all of my podcasts this is one of those things that I learned from the Chive, is I conduct all my podcasts in person. And it's mainly because I want to get myself meeting other people in person.
Yeah.
For the most part, what I may do is we'll maybe have some family vacation, or there might be an event of some sort, that like a NAB that's going on right now, or some other seminar. And when I go there, I might go a week early or stay a week later and just jam pack as many interviews as I can in whatever said city to backlog all of my interviews. And the concept of my podcast is passion and progress. So I talk to people and what they're passionate about, and hopefully through hearing their stories, other people can pursue their passions as well. And the main thing there is just to talk to individuals as an editor. And this goes back to both my video and audio editing days, is when you're making content for clients, the clients obviously are into whatever said content that they're making, or whatever subject matter. And when you're an editor, you want to approach it with the same type of passion as they do, because it's going to come across in the edit. So when you talk to either the clients or the people that are in charge of whatever the content that you're making, they have a way of talking about whatever that subject matter is that's relatable to the masses. And I've found with my podcast, and even as we're discussing this right now, you try and keep whatever you're passionate about relatable to other people, and thus spurs inspiring conversation and insightful conversation. So I think that's the best I've ever tried to sum up how I've gotten to where I'm at. But yeah, there you go.
Cool. Well, I think it's really an interesting journey. I love the fact that you're doing these in person. We're doing more and more of our interviews in person when possible. And I love that you're using video in it. It's something that we strive to do. We've been in this for 3 years and we've not gotten there yet, but it's something on our punch list of things that we want to accomplish in our content creation. And so for me, when I watch what you're doing and see how you put things together, that really fascinates me, because it's a direction in which we're going in the world of content creation, and our interviews with our guests and the content we're creating in the rawest form being our video format.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I will say, obviously from the video aspect, it's a whole nother layer of making sure things don't go wrong during a podcast. So I have I have backups on backups of the audio stuff, but then you have to implement those same. And case in point, I'm actually editing a podcast right now where the camera angle that was on me went down.
Oh no!
So
yeah.
It's completely fine. Because I shoot a master angle, so anytime I need to show me on camera, I just show the master angle, which is it's not as good of a camera and it's not as cool of an angle, but it's much better than just showing the the guests the whole time.
Right. So are you doing like a 3-camera setup then?
Yes, and the exact reason why I can and just to let your viewers know, I try and drive across the importance of backing up material.
Yeah.
And by backing up material, I'm not just talking about hard drives. I'm talking about when you're physically implementing and shooting the content in the first place. And what I mean by that is I shoot or I record with an H6N, which is a 4-input recorder from Zoom. Amazing recorder, just like the podcaster's dream. And then what I do is I take a line out from that recorder and I plug it into a H4N, or sorry, it's called the H6, and then I plug it into an H4N, but it could be anything. Just get the signal out of your main recorder into a separate recorder, and I will tell you right now 3 exact instances where that saved my butt. One was recording John Cena.
Yeah.
We flew out to Washington D.C., recorded the whole podcast, and we went to we got a hotel room just so we could get him comfortable and everything into the room and everything. I hit stop on that record and the thing says air SD card blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And my heart went from wherever it was in Washington D.C. across the world into China. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get fired. This is horrible. But I remembered that I was running a backup.
Yeah.
So there was 3 people on 3 mics, but because of that, I only had a stereo feed, so I had to kind of manipulate some levels. But that is so much better than telling them, hey, guess what, guys? You know that whole hour-and-a-half conversation that you flew out here for and probably scheduled a month in advance and all this other stuff? Yeah, we're just gonna null that. And yeah, so that happened. And then there's been 2 other instances where my SD card filled up on my H6, and then obviously I was recording on the other one, and it saved me on my other recorder. Now, what I just talked about with the 3-camera setup, that's the whole thing. I have 1 camera on the main person, I have 1 camera on me, and I have another camera that's the master. And the whole reason I do the 3-camera setup is 1, backup, and then 2, I can cut in between the 2 angles as a way to edit my video and audio at the same time. Because if there were just jump cuts inside the video, it's okay.
Just becomes much more complex and time consuming.
Not necessarily. Actually, it wouldn't be. It would be less complex, because if you're just jump cutting the person on camera, it would just be easier to stay on the same camera the whole time. But I find that the viewer, if they start seeing something like that, they get turned off. They're like, oh, what did I miss?
Yeah.
Why did they cut this part out? Whereas from my standpoint, I'm trying to anticipate the listener more than the viewer, because audience retention for a podcast, an audio format, especially for mine, is a whole hour. And for somebody to watch that on YouTube is really good. I would say my audience retention on most video podcasts that are an hour are around 10 to 14 minutes. But for an audio podcast, it could be the whole 100%, because people can digest that audio passively. And do other things.
Yeah.
Whereas with YouTube, the problem, or sorry, it's not really a problem, because I love YouTube. It's they want to keep you on the platform, and so while you're watching my video, you may see something over to the side that's I don't know, watch the top 100 dunks that ever happened in the history of mankind. And I'd be like, man, I want to see the top 100 dunks that ever happened in the history of mankind. And then all of a sudden they've clicked off your video.
It's the old adage of the squirrel kind of thing, the whole ice age, where it's like whatever gets the attention is what gets the clicks, which doesn't mean your content's being consumed.
Yeah, exactly. But I think what video does, and why I will continue to do it, is the aspect of, one, it's right now in the podcasting world, I believe it's a competitive advantage. I hope. But again, it becomes down to, like I said, like it's nice for people to see the thing, but if the whole aspect is for you to hold people's attention, I believe the people that are there to watch the content and that sincerely want to actually hear and see that material, they'll stick around. Like there's a good chunk of people that stick around to watch the actual video. But and the other thing with video is and I think it makes the video portion more important, is the micro content. You can now establish and chop up and make all of those little highlights from whatever podcast, which is what I'm in the process of doing right now, is going through my backlog and just taking any podcast, chopping it up into like, I don't know, 3 or 4 different highlights. And then I can then implement any SEO or whatever to drive traffic to that specific part of a podcast. Because it's hard to grab people's attention and be like, hey, check out this podcast that I did with like Cody Warner. It's like, he's a creator and we talk about all this stuff. And now I can chop it off and be like, well, here's the specific moment of all said things. It's an interesting time in the podcasting community, because I feel like people like Gary Vee, Matt D'Avella, and Sarah Dietschy has a different way of going about it. But I think if you're a YouTube creator and you do a podcast, it's like, where do you drive your traffic? Where does it go? And how do you kind of? I'll put the question this way: when you make the podcast, which link do you share out? Do you share out like your iTunes? Do you share out your YouTube? And that's what spurred me to create my website. And now whenever I do a podcast, it's a landing page for whatever interview that is. And on that landing page is the YouTube video, and then all the different links for whether you want to listen to it on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and Google Play. Yeah. And I find that's the easiest way to do it. And not only that, but when you share something like that on Facebook, it doesn't get buried because you're trying to attach it to a YouTube link. Now it's attached to a website, which I think Facebook doesn't hate against.
Well, I think the larger picture, the larger problem is that for many podcasters or content creators for that matter, they don't have a strategy of what they want to get out of the content they're creating. They're going, hey, I'm creating great content. I'm having amazing interviews talking about important topics, or if it's a non-interview or topical based, I'm telling cool stories that should captivate my audience. Yeah, but what do you do with that content? And that question of where do you send people is so significant, because where you send them is a reinforcement of a larger strategy of what you want your audience to do and how you want them to engage with you, and how you want them to become part of your story and you a part of theirs.
Oh, so well said. Yeah, for sure. I think that's, and also I think one of the most important things that I learned while I was at the Chive was owned and operated. And I talk about this when I interviewed.
What do you mean by that, owned and operated? When I interviewed the president or co-founder of the Chive, John Resig. Yeah.
This is one of the guys that I was hand in hand with. Like I was basically, are you familiar with like D-Rock to Gary Vee?
No.
So I was just like, if he was going somewhere, I would be like the guy with the camera behind the scenes, like, all right, like filming what he's doing, and also creating, since he was one of the hosts of the podcast, I would be working with him a lot, one-on-one. And because of that, you get to see how somebody like this would run a company, because you get to, like, while you're in the car, he's getting all of these calls.
It's a master class. Of experience.
All of these different aspects of the company. It's like, well, here's accounting calling me because of this. Here's all of the people from merchandise calling me because we needed to, so on and so forth. And one of the biggest things that we talked about on the podcast with him was this idea of owned and operated, when I recognized that the Chive got to where it's at because they have their own website. And obviously they play in the playgrounds of Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of those other social media outlets. But just like what you were saying, their intent is to get you to their app, or their intent is to get you to their website, and then have the experience that way because it's owned and it's operated. And the sponsorships and everything else that comes with that is so much more powerful if you can prove that, hey, our app and our website has X amount of viewership every single day, day in and day out. And one of the most important things that I've seen from them is, like, say Netflix and Hulu comes out. Well, the owners of the Chive, John and Leo, what they'll be like is like, how do we do that but in our own way? Like, how do we own something that's our owned and operated? Then they came out with Chive TV, which has now been rebranded to Atmosphere TV.
Okay.
And any gas station that you go to, if it has a video player, you're going to see Chive TV pop up. They have like a 15-second span of each gas station in America right now, which is crazy. But the bigger part is, and I love this example. They started Chive TV and they were just really funding money into it. And they were like, man, if this goes, it's going to go. Yeah. And now it's in bars all across America. And the best part of it is, and the greatest example is, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, the NBA finals were on. And we were in San Diego doing a charity piece. And we just went out after filming. And in the bar, this is nothing. These people aren't like affiliated with the Chive. How it comes up is like, hey, you guys have really good content. We just want to put it on our TVs alongside the other stuff that we have going on. So Chive TV, we go into the bar and the NBA finals are on. Chive TV is on like every other TV because it's basically the internet on TV. It's just viral videos. Yeah. So it's really captivating content. But the craziest thing is John turns to me and he's like, there's a lot of advertisers that are paying millions and millions of dollars for the videos and commercials that are going on in between all of the gameplay. Mm-hmm. And what's right next to those is Chive TV. Yeah. And I didn't pay a cent. And I was like, oh my gosh, like here's all of these people going out to all of these places and they got it right, man. They got it right. It's not like massive, like people aren't like in their homes like, let me turn on Chive TV. But if you go, it's starting to get a really big groundswell of bars and other places where if you go there and you see the content that's being played, it's really awesome. But that in and of itself proves that they've created their own platform for people to digest their own content, and they're not bound by if an algorithm changes on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, or anything like that. So taking that as a great example, I try and now strive for, all right, I'm making all of this stuff. How does it translate to an owned and operated operation?
Super, super cool. As we wrap up this segment, we always ask 3 questions. The first one being, how are you finding purpose in what you do?
Great question. It every single day, it's a completely, sometimes it comes out of the blue. Like, for example, I did a podcast with, I got flown out to do a podcast with one of the first employees of PayPal and eBay. And now he has his own, he has his own SEO firm, but he heard what I was doing and he was just like, hey man, you want to come and interview me? I was like, yes, I want to do that. So I interviewed him, but, on the tail end of it, we went to this place where he's a board member of, and it's called the Madonna Rehab Center.
Okay.
And this is a place where people go that have had cancer or they got in an accident, or it's like military people and they need to get rehabilitation and they want to get walking again. Okay. And it's world-class care, like one of the most state-of-the-art places I've ever seen. And they've got like all of those really advanced things, any kind of machinery that you would think that would help people to get them to walk, plus just really dedicated staff. Yeah. And I didn't really know what I've never seen a place like this before, but it's huge. It's like 2 to 3 football fields long.
Wow, it's massive.
Yeah. So I just grabbed my camera. One of their PR people gave us the whole tour. And while he was giving me the tour, I just like was asking him questions and about the place. And I turned that into a podcast. And it may not be like some of the best sounding audio, but it's because it's just the on camera. I had like a little Rode mic.
Yeah.
But I try and explain in the podcast what's going on. And then I also turned it into the video portion, right, for my YouTube channel. And it's like a 30-minute to, 15-minute thing. Because of that video, there's like 5 people that didn't even know about Madonna Rehab Center.
Wow.
And then they went and got care. And I'm hoping that they're walking now. This place has a 90% like completion rate within 6 months, people like walking. I don't know what the exact statistic is, so don't quote me on it, but I know he talks about it in the podcast. And I thought that was really cool to hear that, like, man, if I wouldn't have made this, who knows where those people would be now. And then there's any other circumstance, like as I've progressed in this, both the podcast and my YouTube content, I'm constantly getting DMs that which is the whole reason I started out to do what I'm doing, of, hey, what's this microphone that you would recommend, or I'm having trouble with this type of edit, and how would you approach this? And then I would just be like, hey, let's try this, or let me introduce you to this person that knows about this thing, and so on and so forth. So that's been it's been awesome. And as it grows, there's more of those different kind of opportunities that in other stories like that present themselves.
What is one challenge you're currently working to overcome in the business side of what you're building?
Time. And it would be, I would say time, but I know what I need to do. And it has to be in terms of outsourcing and implementing what are my processes, what's working for me right now that I know like 6 months down the line, I'm still probably going to do that same kind of process. And how can I outsource that in a way that is beneficial to both the person that I'm working with and myself. And a lot of that also has to do with like, all right, I'm in the initial stages of what I'm doing. So anytime I get freelance gigs or any of the income that I'm getting from Patreon, my affiliate links or YouTube is all just going into my business bank account and just like saving up and making sure that I can start paying other people for the things that I know that will benefit the business and also like help me grow. So, and I know once things even get on more of a roll, having those processes in place. But yeah, that's the biggest thing is judging time for my own personal creation versus clientele creation. There's a balance there. So obviously for right now, I need capital. So I'm taking on a lot of freelance gigs, and that obviously detracts from the amount that I can create for myself. But at the same end, it's also like, okay, cool. I need money to be doing the things. And it also helps me stay grounded in the material that I'm teaching. Like, because who wants to learn from somebody that's not actually doing the editing? So I kind of look at it two ways, where I'm still getting a whole bunch of different offers to do editing in different regards. And whenever I take on a project, I see it both as, yes, this is a freelance gig, but also what am I learning from this? And I'm asking myself those kind of questions to help anybody within my audience.
Now, for you're creating, you are managing your time between client projects and then also your own creation. But what's the next big goal you have for what you want to do?
Oh, full-time content creation, full-time YouTuber for sure.
Yeah,
that's for sure the goal. Just be able to wake up, do the material that I want to do on a 24/7 basis.
In a moment, we'll be back with Javier Mercedes to go deeper into this conversation, to talk more about content creation around the world of telling stories, and then finding passion and making progress in the passion you have. Are you looking for the perfect speaker for your upcoming event, seminar, or conference? Well, I would love to be part of it. I can talk about a lot of different topics, but our favorites, of course, are innovation, idea formation, finding your creative purpose, and, of course, micro experiments. So drop me an email, mike@jumblethink.com. Let's start the conversation. I would love to speak at your event and help your attendees get the best out of themselves and step into the dreams and destinies they have for the future. Now let's learn a little bit more about our sponsor for today's episode, OpportunityInChina.com. Looking for a way to change your career or social prospects? Do you see the world around you changing and haven't quite figured out what path you should take? You are not alone in seeking opportunity. Visit OpportunityInChina.com for access to scholarships to attend university in China, or if you have a bachelor's degree already, OpportunityInChina.com provides access to jobs in the educational sector all across China. Now, working in China is not only often well paid, but it will place you among 1/5 of the world's population, boosting your social network, bringing you more deeply into the story of globalization, and opening up doors you never knew existed. So seize your opportunity now. Visit their website for more information at OpportunityInChina.com. By the way, they have a great podcast. Simply search for Opportunity in China Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Now let's jump back into the conversation with Javier Mercedes. We are back with Javier. Okay, so before we get rolling, how can people find and connect with you?
Best way I find is on Instagram. I'm at Javier Mercedes X. That's JAVIERMERCEDES with an X on the end. Javier Mercedes X. And then obviously at this point in time, I respond to all YouTube comments, even if they are negative.
Okay.
I try and get around to all of them. If I do miss one, it's probably because it's not showing in my notifications. And then obviously on my website, javiersmercedes.com, I have my contact information there as well.
One of the things I think is missing in the world of podcasting is a true sense of community. With YouTube and vlogging, you have a sense of engagement. People can leave comments and engage with you. In the podcasting space, really all of that conversation happens outside of the platforms, whether it's iTunes or Spotify. You aren't really having the engagement and conversation right in the thread of the content itself. You mentioned right there that you respond to all the comments, both positive and negative. Talk to us about how that's impacted you, maybe encouraged you to rethink how you do things or whatever that is in those interactions. How has that impacted your content creation?
Man. So as an editor, you have to have a thick skin about, and it's not, I don't even think that's the correct term, but as an editor, you have to have the right kind of mentality when receiving feedback, because especially from my background, anytime I receive feedback, obviously it's coming from a good place. Like, you're working with a client, you're working with a producer, you're working with people that want to make the best piece of content as possible. And so any kind of feedback that you get is good. When you get to that YouTube section, though, I recently had a video pop off that did really well, and I recorded it like 2 years ago. Wow. And I just got around to editing it because I chopped up this material that I filmed into like 5 different kinds of content. And then I forgot that I made the first 4 like a year ago, but then I was on a plane and I was like, oh, this is on my hard drive. I can edit this on the plane and then just post it when I get off. Lo and behold, that's the one video that everybody it's my most popular video now. And what happened with that one is I recorded a podcast, and I had the mics like as you would normally have them for a podcast, but then I just went into this Scott Clark. He's an amazing director of photography. We started talking about his camera, and this is the camera that is behind all of the Hollywood movies.
So is this the Airy and Red conversation? Yeah. I actually was watching that earlier today or earlier this week. I'm not quite sure at this point, but very fascinating because that always intrigues me, the difference of like a DSLR or even like some of the C level Canon stuff versus an Airy cam or Red stuff. And I have friends that use both. And to me, seeing that video, I really loved it.
Yeah, your same curiosity is the same curiosity that I have. Being a YouTube creator and then also growing up in the space at the Chive, we were using things like the Sony FS7 and that in-house, but we would also contract out other stuff for bigger projects, and those guys would bring in the Reds and the Aries.
Yeah.
So that whole conversation had to do with the Ari camera, and from my standpoint, I was just asking him questions that was curious, like why do Hollywood filmmakers make all this stuff, and why does it cost so much, and everything that has to do with that. What ended up happening is it's a great conversation, but this was an afterthought to my podcast. I was like, oh, let's just film this really quick. So I just put a boom microphone that was kind of in the area of us, and the actual microphones that we were podcasting with are way across the table. And we have the conversation. It's a great conversation, but the audio is so. And I explained that I'm an audio engineer, right? And there's a whole like practice what you preach. And a lot of the comments on my most popular video right now are like, this audio is horrible. What are you doing with this like thing? And not only that, but they're talking about like the framing of the video too. They're like, why did you like, cause it's on a wide angle, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why I did what I did, but it was mostly just because I was in the spur of the moment. I was like, oh, hey, let's just do this really quick.
Yeah.
And then it definitely speaks towards like the quantity and quality and all that kind of stuff. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because you talked about comments, and to me, I was like, the comment section was awesome because you get to actually get feedback on all of this material.
Yeah.
But that one video, when you have a video pop off, it's kind of like demoralizing every time you wake up, especially when you've spent the last 10 years of your life being a professional audio and video editor, getting comments like, why did you do this with your video? Why did you do this with your audio? And every single day you wake up for like a week and you're getting like 10 to 15 comments about like, you're horrible at recording audio, and you can't like explain to them, well, let me tell you about my past of doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
So, but lo and behold, I would try and answer every single one of those comments. And I would say, man, thank you so much for the feedback. I hope you watch some of my other content. But I'm making a much bigger deal about it than it is, because if you look at it, those are only a minute amount of people that watch that video. There's a whole bunch of other people that watched that video that found it very valuable. And even the people that were leaving the comments about bad audio or bad video were also saying like, man, the audio quality might be bad, but this video was great.
Yeah.
And yeah, that whole thing. To get what you were talking about with community, I love the fact that I think that's another great aspect of recording all of my podcasts, is because with each episode now I can get a little bit of feedback on what people liked and all of that other stuff. Also with the DMs and everything, people will send in like, oh, I really like this one part. If somebody tags you in a podcast in your Instagram stories, it's really cool to see like, oh, so-and-so, I really like this thing. Or with the tweets, it's like social media everywhere, and you get feedback all the time. And I think from my standpoint, seeing things like audience retention and other aspects of that, I guess, subject matter, I can take all of that information and then better myself and my content from there on out, as well as ask myself the real question of, am I like, I'm not making this for myself. I'm making it so I can present value to others.
Absolutely.
While enjoying what I'm doing.
Yeah, completely. All right. So you're creating content, and you were talking a little bit about engaging with your community, with your audience, whether positive or negative there. One of the things for me that's really frustrating, I love and hate social media. There are many things I love about it. There are many things, of course, I hate about it.
Time consuming.
Yeah. And so with content creation and with social media, and with running a freelance portion of what you're doing, I know for me, I can relate to that. I have a web agency. I'm creating content that's audio, not video, but we're creating that, and we're doing all the outreach to guests. We're doing all of that work, and by we, I mean me. How do you manage so much? Because I know for me, that's one of the things that always frustrates me. There are things I want to do that I can't get to. There are things I know I should do that I can't get to because other things are pulling me away from the things I want to or should be doing. So how do you navigate that in your own content creation cycle and with running your own freelance business?
So I guess there would be there could be some sort of scientific way of explaining this, but for me personally, I think I have, and I'm just going to call it this right now, like a wife ohmmeter, where if anybody that's married could relate, and I think it keeps me grounded, is I can get lost in all the social media stuff, all of the content creation, creativity stuff, and then especially when I started out, it's like, man, I got to get this guy. I need to hustle. I need to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
And not only that, but I have 2 kids as well. So I would be doing all of this material. And once I got done with my freelance material for the day, then I would have to turn around and edit a whole podcast, export that, and by that time it's already like 3 a.m. in the morning, and I'm like, what the heck just happened? And then that reaches this threshold where you have some hard discussions with your wife, and then you're like, wow, I really need to step up my game as a family person. And to be honest, that's kind of how I gauge that. And it's not where I would go to one extreme one way where it'd be like, oh, content creation, oh, let's build the influence and all this other stuff, to I'm going to scale back, and then you go towards family and everything like that. And at this point, now that I know where one extreme is, I just really, what's more important to me is family. So I always err, like just a perfect example of this is I was really so gung-ho about podcast comes out every Wednesday.
Yeah.
No matter what, the podcast is going out Wednesday. Well, I know I need like I said, I need the capital, and I need to actually make money for my family. So I had a very busy 2 weeks with freelancing, and I was still getting out my videos. The last video that I just put out, it took me a lot longer than what I expected. And then last night it was like, all right, it's 9:00. I just got done with some more freelance stuff. Do I turn around and make this podcast, or do I go down and spend time with my wife? And that's, at this point in time, it's like, no, whenever my kids come home, I build my schedule around, all right, they're back from daycare. So now I don't do basically when my kids are home, I'm not doing any work. And then after that, it's like, all right, do I go back up and do more video and other things, or it's like a game time decision every night. And for the most part, at this point, it's like, all right, need to make money. After that, then let's make some like content creation. But on top of all of that is like spending time with family. And I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think that's how I gauge things. It's like, well, am I being a good father right now, or no? So I'm always going to err on the side of being a good father.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. 2 young kids myself. And for so many people, it's amazing what they put their time into, what they do to invest into what matters to them. And many people aren't intentional about those decisions. They just kind of go along with the flow and aren't making the choices to invest their time, their energy, their resources into the things that matter to them. So how are you, going one step further, you talked about that wife-o-meter and that feedback, but how are you being intentional with the decisions you make about whether it's a guest on the show, whether it's the content you want to create, whether it's how you invest your time? How are you choosing? How are you engaging and creating intentional systems around what you're doing?
It's been a learning curve for sure.
Okay.
Because when you make something, then you start to understand, did this work? Did this not work? Is it worth my time to put in that extra 10% of effort to make that video or this part of the podcast? And that's where the rubber hits the road. Because I think the best thing for anybody that's looking to get highly efficient at something is the quantity.
Yeah.
And then I like to say quality through quantity.
What does that mean? Quality through quantity.
So to me, the whole aspect of getting a podcast out every Wednesday, getting two other videos out in between those podcasts every week, what that ends up doing is by setting a deadline, you establish a time frame for yourself, and then you start to learn really quick what really matters and what really doesn't matter, and how to become efficient at what you're doing. And it's a constant. I'm never going to be at the state that I want to be in terms of my efficiency, but it's a constant thing that you have to work on and ask yourself, are these titles worth the amount of time that I'm putting in there? Is this intro worth the amount of time? Will people even get past this part of the video? And if they don't, was it worth me spending all of that time on the back end of my video? Which is really, like, people will say, if you're passionate about it, then the stuff will come and all that other material. But I think after you get past the whole aspect of like, look, I know I like making podcasts. I know I like making videos. Now let's reach a happy medium of what presents enough value to the people that are watching it and what's fulfilling me creatively to do that. And I guess from my standpoint, the material that I've implemented to get into like nitty gritties is, if I'm going to spend a lot of time working on something, I better make sure that it's on the very first parts of my video, because if that's not in place, then the rest of the stuff doesn't even matter. And what's even more important than that is, say, your title and your thumbnails. If people aren't even going to click on the video, then all of that work that you put onto your video just doesn't even matter. So that's one thing that I've been trying to work on recently, is just the title and the thumbnails themselves. Because what I might think will be awesome, I start to text some of my friends or tweet out like A or B on this thumbnail, and then all of a sudden I get all of this feedback about, oh, that thumbnail that I thought was really cool wasn't the good one, and everybody's saying this one, and you just don't know that. So if there's one thing that I would suggest for people listening is, if you're in the content creation space, do a poll, like, especially for your material. If you're at a certain point where people would respond to something like that, you can say, hey, do you like this thumbnail? Do you like that thumbnail? Or ask them like, what questions do you want me to ask? Or any of those kinds of things, because that's far more superior than what you think may be the best way. Now, that's obviously with a grain of salt, because obviously you're the person making the content, and you have to, you're not just there to be like a button pusher. Right. So I think there's a happy medium there, but I think one of the things that I constantly am reminding myself of is, it's not all about me, and it's about what can I make this video or podcast be about, so other people can get value from that. I can tell, man, just to give you an example, some of my first podcasts were like, I interviewed the CEO and the founder of Yellowbird Hot Sauce. Yeah, they're in like Walmart and Whole Foods, for those that don't know who they are, and they're a national brand at this point. And my first 20 minutes of talking to that guy, I felt so bad now listening to it, because I just felt like I was wasting his time. I'm like, what? You went to the University of Florida. Like, have you ever seen an alligator? Like, what? What? Like, I cringe so hard listening to that podcast. But that in and of itself is the learning experience. Yeah. You learn what's working, what's not working. And I'm so happy that he was so understanding. You could tell that he was giving me pointers like, hey, maybe you should listen to this podcast to get some ideas of what to do with your podcast and all that stuff. And I was like, cool, I'll go listen to that. But I thought my podcast was awesome. And now I listen to it. I'm like, look, I could have cut this podcast down into like 30 minutes and not talk to him about all of this random riffraff and actually given the audience what they came to listen to the podcast for.
Right. Absolutely. You have 46 episodes, I think, so far of the video podcast, something like that. And you've had a wide range of guests. I was looking through some of the guests, and you have content creators, you have executives. Tell us a little bit about some of your favorite episodes.
Oh man. Oh man. So one of the ones I already brought up was the one with John Resig, the co-founder, just because I spent so much time with him personally, so I could ask him all these questions. It's really like a behind the scenes type of podcast. I think it's an interesting one for anybody that wants to hear about the online content creation space, but not from an individual. They're like a corporate entity, like a media like whole brand. So what does that look like from their perspective and the decisions that they've made to be successful in today's day and age? There's some that just completely out of nowhere like blew my mind. There was a guy named Mike Johnson, not the runner, but he's a guy that I randomly met in Atlanta, and he told me his story. And he was a voiceover guy. He was in radio, and he wanted to do an online radio station just for fun. And like one of his first guests that he had on was Justin Bieber. And like he kept like telling me his story, and I was like flabbergasted by all the things that this guy had accomplished so far. So those ones were like a one like that was interesting to me because just the story that he had to tell was I didn't know what I was getting into, and then I heard the story. I was like, whoa, this is awesome. So some really cool ones though, also like kind of story, but somewhat good for just insightfulness on what it's like in someone's prospective career path. I interviewed 2 Olympians, and they're obviously doing different things now besides what they were doing because they're retired. But one was in Greco-Roman wrestling. Yeah. And the other one was in judo. And listening to them tell their story, we only stayed on the Olympics for a little bit of that podcast, but it's really interesting getting to know what is it like if you are a child and both of your parents, one was the first national judo champion in the world from America, and then the other one is coaching the Rio Greco-Roman team, and has also been a 2-time alternate for the Olympic team. And then they also coach kids now in Colorado, and like what is it like getting to as both the parent and the child? What's that relationship of how do you coach these? Is it like really intense? And I have to say, man, I got to see some of kids wrestling. I don't know if you've seen a kids wrestling match. This is like grade schoolers or lower. They are so intense. It's crazy how intense it is. I can say that I think probably 90% of the kids that are like 8 years old or younger could probably beat my butt in like whatever they were doing. Those ones were cool. And then obviously getting to talk to other executives and I guess content creators as well, just hearing about what they do on a day-to-day basis and what's working, what's not working, and then what they've learned from their failures, in hearing different perspectives from different people it gets really interesting because it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. I haven't released this episode yet, but I just did a guy that he's a metal worker and he makes signs. He makes neon signs and other signs, and like a lot of the signs around Austin are built by him. Wow. And these are the really cool signs. These aren't like your run in the mill chain whatever signs. He's like the guy that you call, for example, he built the Lollapalooza main entrance sign.
Oh,
so
crazy.
if you're going into an event or like ACL or these music festivals, if you're going into these music festivals or other like live events, the huge sign that you would see was probably built by him and his team.
Oh, wow.
And like hearing his stories and all the stuff in the background about what goes on with that material is really cool, because like somebody like him, he leaves nothing on the table. He's one of the most straightforward guys that I've interviewed, and also probably one that's cussed the most. So it's probably going to be an unedited version, and hopefully people won't unsubscribe from my podcast from the vulgarities that he says. But I think it comes from a place of he's one of the most real people that I've met, where he just tells it like it is, and hearing people from that perspective is really cool. But just getting to interact with individuals on a weekly basis has been awesome. And sometimes these are podcasts where some friend will be like, hey, I hear you're in that town, you should go interview this guy.
Yeah.
And then I ended up like I was just in Denver, and while I was there, somebody recommended this guy that owned a restaurant, and I interviewed him, and that was another one that turned into a completely different story that I didn't really have a background on the guy. I was just like, hey man, I had somebody recommended I come here. What do you want to talk about? And then we start talking, and I'm like mind blown.
Yeah.
All the stuff that like by 25 years old, he was already managing like a $10 million company and all this other stuff. It was like, it was crazy. Yeah. That's I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super, super cool. Remind people how people can find you once again.
Well, the podcast is Passion in Progress with Javier Mercedes on all the different platforms. And then on Instagram, I'm at Javier Mercedes X, or actually any kind of social media, Twitter, Facebook, all those things. I'm at Javier Mercedes X. That's JAVIER MERCEDES with an X on the end. And then I make YouTube videos. I'm a YouTuber. Just look up Javier Mercedes, and I will be there at a click of a Google.
We will be back with Javier Mercedes for our rapid fire questions. Once again, we want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, OpportunityInChina.com. Here's a little bit more from them.
At the dawn of the 19th century, forward-thinking people moved to the commercial centers of Europe. Moving into the 20th century, America welcomed millions into the land of freedom and opportunity. It is now the 21st century. Many of the successes and fortunes of our generations will be made in China. To learn how you can seize opportunity in China, follow the Opportunity in China podcast. The Opportunity in China podcast is available anywhere podcasts are streamed, or you can visit our website at opportunityinchina.com.
Placez votre électrophone à portée de votre main.
Now let's jump into rapid fire questions with Javier Mercedes. We are back with Javier. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
I am prepared.
The first question is, as a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Probably if this were a job, and actually in today's day and age, I think there's probably somebody that does it. As a kid, I would put up a tape player, hit record on my brothers playing Nintendo music, or they would be playing Nintendo games, and I'd do my own radio show. So I would record the music coming out of the TV into the tape player. Then I would walk off into the corner and be like, that was Mega Man level 8. And then I would ask my brother like, hey, what did you think of that? And then he'd be like, the boss was really hard. Then I would do the next level. That's what I thought I would do for the rest of my life. Just record Nintendo games coming out of a TV and make my own radio show off of video games.
What is
video game music?
Yeah, super cool. What is one tip you'd give someone with a big idea and dream and they don't know where to start?
They don't know where to start?
Yeah.
Oh man. I would say find somebody that would know something about whatever it is you're trying to do, and then the next step, obviously from whatever you would learn from said person, if they respond to you, which hopefully they do, is consistency. Consistency is the biggest thing that you can do, whether that be in quality, timing, deadlines, all of it. Consistency is key, and that's where the whole quantity quality through quantity, where as long as you're consistent and you're making things, you are always evolving by learning from your mistakes or learning from all of the other things that you did from that last project that you did, and then you can have a building blocks for wherever you want to go in the future.
What is one big lie about entrepreneurship you want to break?
Well, for me personally, as a content creator, I think the thing that got to me the most was when I left my full-time gig, was the idea that the next day I would be in my home hitting the record button, making all this content.
Okay.
Which was not true.
Yeah.
It took me like 3 to 4 months of learning all of the other stuff that comes with running a business. And that's, when it came to right the day after, it's like, let's start making content. Well, if I start getting freelance clients, how am I going to get paid? Well, I got to make an LLC.
Yeah.
Where's that money going to go? Well, I got to make a business bank account. Like, well, when it comes to tax season, what am I going to do? Man, I need to get QuickBooks. Wait a minute, I need a CPA. Like, all of this stuff starts to add up. And then just like we talked about earlier, I don't know how to build a website, but I have a podcast and I have all these different links. What do I need? Well, how about I just build a place where the viewer can go and then they can choose what they want to watch or listen to that podcast from. So I think establishing an infrastructure for success at the beginning is something that I underestimated. What is one big change you'd like to see in the world? Oh, you're all these hard-hitting questions. I guess I'll just bring up this example just because it was something that I talked about earlier in the podcast, was the idea of treating individuals and other creators online when you're leaving comments as real people, as opposed to just like this entity that's out in the interwebs. I have so much more gratitude towards and understanding towards people that are grinding day in and day out to make what they want to do and what they're passionate about a successful means of living.
Yeah.
And I think it was do you know the host of Hot Ones?
Mm-mm.
I think his name's Sean Evans. I may be wrong. I think his first name's Sean at least, but he really recently made a tweet that was like, he said something along the lines of, sometimes you just got to tell a hater, hey man, I'm trying the best I can.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think that's like to relate back to something that I talked about earlier. I think that would be cool.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Honestly, that I went for everything that I did 110%, and in doing so provided an example for those around me that it is possible to do what you set out to do. And I hope with what I'm doing is a great example to like my 2 kids right now. And if they were to come to me with some crazy idea on whatever they want to do with their life, I have a deeper understanding of like, oh, okay, well, now from my experiences, how would you do that? Like, what does this look like 5 years from now? And from that, just having, what's weird is I just want to say, I mean, I just want my kids to be cool.
Yeah.
In terms of like, I just want them to be nice people, but
Yeah.
I like how, then it begs the question like, well, how do you do that? Well, so on and so forth. And then obviously the first part of my answer is kind of what that is. But I think from my standpoint, it's just the people that I have influenced in my family to have them be better because I was around.
Where do you find inspiration?
Well, specifically, one of your past guests, Cody Warner, recently.
Yeah.
He's cool. He's another creator that I look at and just how he's crushing the game right now, in terms of everything that he's doing. But it could be in music, it can be in other content creators. But what's tricky about watching other people's videos is, one, there's the time commitment that you're exchanging, and then two, I don't want to start stealing. I don't want my content to start looking like, or I don't want to start sounding like, I don't want, like, I love Tim Ferriss's podcast.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any episode you listen to that guy is worth your time. But I find myself just turning, or Gary Vee or any of those kinds of people, I find myself turning into recycled versions of them. And that's not what I want to do. But I also want to like keep growing in my space. So I will say for specifics, I will say like Gary Vee, Tim Ferriss, Cody Warner, other YouTubers that are within the hashtag No Small Creator community, that getting to meet other YouTube people in person and then establishing a relationship offline kind of solidifies what you're doing, or not necessarily what you're doing, but it gives a backbone or somebody to bounce ideas off of, which is really cool. So getting inspired by other creators that I've met in real life, and whenever they come out with a video or another piece of content where I can be like, man, really good job. That's awesome that you did that, you know?
Yeah. You want to hear one of the best pieces of advice around that problem that I've ever heard?
What?
Okay, so Tony Bennett was being interviewed, and I was watching the interview, and they were talking about, how did you find your voice in singing? How did you find your style? And were you listening to Sinatra? Were you listening to the other greats from before your era and contemporaries? And he said, no, what I do is I listen to the instrumentation. And then I start thinking, like, how would a trumpet sing what I'm singing? And then I would apply that principle of like taking inspiration from a different space, from a different style, and applying it to a different outlet, a different way to do it. So I'm taking an instrumentation and I'm mimicking how they would communicate that message through words and singing it, instead of copying how somebody else does it. And he said, that's how I found my voice, because if I tried to be Sinatra, then everyone would compare me against Sinatra, and I'm not going to be Sinatra. And I always found that really inspiring, because for me as a podcaster, I love listening to other podcasters, but how do I do exactly what you're saying? Not copy what they're doing, but be inspired to learn from that. And so even now I'm like, hey, maybe I can learn from somewhere else. Maybe it's the Actors Guild on PBS or other places. How are people telling stories? How are they communicating? How are they interviewing? And then how can I apply that to what I'm building?
Yeah, for sure. I love that.
What is one book you think every dreamer and entrepreneur should read, and why?
Oh man, books aren't my thing.
Okay, well, let's change it up. Then. So for you're a content creator and you're consuming content, whether it be video vlogs or whether it be podcasts. What is one media source that you think every dreamer and entrepreneur should read, and why, or engage with?
Like, without a doubt, Gary Vee.
Okay.
Just because anything that, I mean, I'm assuming anybody that's listening to this probably knows who he is. If they don't, if you type him in and then you go down that rabbit hole, he'll inspire you, and I think there's this thing with Gary Vee where at first maybe he might come off not necessarily narcissistic, but like he knows it all.
Yeah.
But once you start listening to more or consuming more of his content, and you see that he's practicing what he preaches, then you're like, okay, this guy's for real. And he gives practical advice. And I think a lot of those people that are really, really big in the podcasting space and also just content creation space, that are the entrepreneurial, inspirational kind of people, kind of get a bad rap for giving blanket statement advice. Like I think it's a very true thing that some advice for some people may not be what others are looking for at any point in time. And it might be like, well, you just got to do it, or some example like that. Yeah. But I think all of those people had to start at some point. Yeah. And this gets back to, I just appreciate the grind that they put in. And now that they're famous, people will also want to be like, well, like, you're not really saying anything. You're just like trying to inspire people to go do something. And I think in any person in that genre what they're really doing is they're showcasing over time that, yes, they are successful by inspiring people through their talks and other things like that. But in doing that, they also showcase that, like, look, I've been this successful for this amount of time and I'm still successful. So there must be something to what I'm saying, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing, at least for me, in the whole entrepreneurship material, because I feel like somebody like a Tim Ferriss can be amazing for nitty gritty. This is how it works in the business world. But then when you listen to somebody like Lewis Howes or Rise or like Gary Vee, there's information there, but sometimes it could be like, it could sound like recycled or whatever, but you have to remember that some of these people are listening to content like this for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that took me a while to understand is what, like I said before, what may not ring with you might strike a fire under somebody else. So, yeah, that's my answer.
What is one trend you're currently excited about?
One trend I'm excited about, man, just being an online influencer.
Okay.
And the possibilities that has entail. I interviewed, and to give, I guess, concrete evidence of this, I interviewed an SEO guy, Darren Herman of Gobato.
Okay.
He runs a SEO firm out of here in Austin, and he was talking to me about the behind the scenes of marketing for the different businesses that he's working for. And hands down, the thing that works the most and drives the most gung-ho sales or reoccurring customers is online influencers, because these people have built a trust with their audience. And when they say they like something, if it's not somebody that's been giving, oh, I like this drink A one day, and the next day I like microwavable food B and all that kind of stuff. The influence that people have on other individuals in a good way can then benefit the companies and the influencer and all of that stuff. Like, I feel as like the whole online influencer age wasn't possible 10 years ago.
Right.
And something like what I'm doing right now, where I'm balancing my freelance and content creation, is possible, where I can supplement what I'm not making with what I'm creating online right now with my freelance. And then as the tables start to turn, then I can kind of segue off the freelancing and then turn into full-time content creator.
What is one thing you wish you would have known when you first started out?
I think making a template for everything that I'm doing.
Okay.
Or having a process to everything that I'm doing. And that's kind of with an asterisk by it, because in YouTube content creation, I feel there's just, when you're making stuff, you have to be creative. So obviously you go outside the box. But I think with podcasts specifically, when I started, it was like, do I have an intro? The first couple of episodes didn't have an intro. Then I made an intro, and then it took me forever to record the intro. And then because it was video, I'm like on camera, and I'm like, I'm memorizing my words, and then I'm looking at the camera and trying to say it again verbatim to the camera. Then that would take an hour for me to do an intro, which is not sustainable.
No.
And then what graphics are on the screen when you're doing your intro for a video podcast, because you can't really show the podcast. All those things, you start to get ideas for how do I make this faster and better. And that's where quality through quantity, just because I did so many episodes, I was able to chip away and find better ways to start doing stuff. So templatizing your workflow would for sure be something that I would have liked to do in the beginning, but I don't know how I would have done it without having the experience in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And our final rapid fire question is, what is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
Be full-time creator. Just wake
love
up,
that.
wake up. And this is something that most of the people I interview, they have this kind of mentality where you wake up and you work on the projects that you want to work on that day in perpetuity.
Yeah.
That's the dream, and that's where I'm going.
As we wrap up today's episode, we always like to leave our guests have a final thought. So what's your final thought for our audience today?
I think I already talked about it, but consistency.
Yeah.
Anything that I would want to drive across, or if anybody was to DM me or anything like that, the biggest thing that anyone can learn from is consistency, and just putting in the reps of whatever it is you're doing. If you're making a blog, if you're making a YouTube channel, if you're making a podcast, put in the effort day in, day out, and you will get the results. Sometimes it will happen within 6 months, a year, 5 years, whatever it is. If you do good work, people will notice. And that's the biggest thing that I can do, or that I can say. Yeah.
Javier, thank you so much for taking time out, sharing your insights. I love your tutorials. I love what you're creating. You inspire me. So if you're listening, I encourage you, go check out what Javier's doing. And Javier, thanks once again for being with us today.
Hey, you know what would be awesome is if people went on to the iTunes app and gave you an awesome review for listening to this podcast.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been amazing.
Once again, we want to thank Javier Mercedes for taking time out to be with us. He has some great tutorials and interviews, so go check him out on YouTube and Instagram and wherever else you'd like to connect with people. We also want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, OpportunityInChina.com. Go check them out, OpportunityInChina.com. As we wrap up today's episode, I encourage you to go out there and chase those dreams and ideas that are deep inside of you. We need you. The world needs you to step up to the plate and to swing big. Even if you miss the first couple times, just keep on swinging, going after those dreams and ideas. And ultimately, they're going to impact the world. They're going to impact your family, your community, and the globe around you. So get out there, dream big, and change the world around you.
Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps. Vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.